That's going to further weaken the NATO alliance. Macron wants to see an EU-Russia security pact. That's exactly what the Russians want to hear from the European leaders. And so weakness and division, of course, only benefits the Russians directly. And these are intensely dangerous times, I think, for the future of the West, for the future of the Western alliance, which is heavily fractured and undermined, of course, by so-called European leaders who won't lift a finger, frankly, to stand up to Moscow.
Niall, thank you very much indeed. That's Niall Gardner, Director of the Margaret Thatcher Centre for Freedom. Now we have a big hitting panel on Cross Question tonight. That's coming up in a few moments' time. I'll be joined in the studio by the Shadow Attorney General, Emily Thornberry. Layla Moran is the Liberal Democrats Foreign Affairs spokesperson. Baroness Claire Fox is with us from the Academy of Ideas, and someone you all know very well indeed, financial commentator David Buik. The number is 0345 6060 973, and the lines are open right now. And of course, flick on Global Player and you can watch our proceedings as well.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
Leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 8 o'clock, the Prime Minister says the UK will always stand up for freedom and democracy. It follows talks with Ukraine's President Zelensky. In a joint statement, they've warned further Russian incursion would be a massive strategic mistake. The two leaders have been holding a press conference.
We are also preparing a package of sanctions and other measures to be enacted the moment the first Russian tow cap crosses further into Ukrainian territory.
Manchester United footballer Mason Greenwood has been further arrested on suspicion of sexual assault and making threats to kill. Officers are continuing to question him about claims of rape and the assault of a woman after allegations emerged online. The 20-year-old's been suspended from training and playing for the club. The Home Secretary's called the behaviour of some Metropolitan Police officers sickening, following a report by the Independent Office for Police Conduct. An investigation found racism, misogyny, harassment and offensive social media messages in an investigation centred around Charing Cross Police Station in London. And the dispute over Colin the Caterpillar cake's finally over. Marks and Spencer and Aldi say they've come to an agreement over accusations the German discount chain copied the design. LBC Markets report the FTSE 100 close up 71 points at 75.35. The pound buys $1.35 and €1.20. LBC weather, patchy rain but dry elsewhere, low of 4. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Serena Farrow.
This is LBC from Global. Leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale.
Hello, a very good evening to you. It's 3 minutes past 8 on LBC. Welcome to Tuesday's edition of Cross Question. We have a full switchboard of calls already, but if you want to get through, you might have to try again and again. But the number is 0345 6060 973. With me on our panel tonight, Emily Thornberry, the Shadow Attorney General, Labour MP for Islington South and Finsbury. Baroness Claire Fox is a non-affiliated life peer. It's a very awkward title, isn't it, really? Director and founder of the think tank Academy of Ideas and the author of I Find That Offensive. David Buik is LBC's finance commentator, and Layla Moran is Lib Dem MP for Oxford West and Abingdon and chair of the COVID APPG. And of course, let me remind you, as I always do, you can watch us on Global Player as well.
0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross Question with Iain Dale. This is LBC.
And if you can't get through, you could always text us on 84850. Richard in Woolwich is our first caller. Richard, very good evening. What would you like to ask our panel?
Good evening, Iain. Thanks for the opportunity. Panel, Peter Kyle, MP, has posted in the last hour on Twitter that Winston Churchill said an MP's priorities are country, constituency and party in that order. What do the panel think are Boris Johnson's priorities?
Let me add on to that. What are your priorities? Well, the three of you that are in politics, David may have very different priorities. I don't know. Layla Moran, let's start with you.
Great question. Himself is the answer. the thing is, it's always been himself. There are reports from even when he was a boy at Eton that's what the master of his house said about him at the time. It's how he has done so well in politics. I think he has that instinct to claw his way up, to get himself out of difficult situations. It's been an extraordinary litany of failing upwards over the course of his career. The problem is with being Prime Minister is he's got nowhere else to fail to. And I think the concern that we all...
World King.
Well, World King, I'm sure he'd want to, Iain.
That was what he said when he was a child.
Well, quite right. And I think the problem we have now is that he absolutely is not putting the country first. He is putting his own career first. The phone call that he was meant to have with Putin yesterday was a really good example of it, because at a time when he should be focused on those huge issues, he wasn't. He was trying to save his own bacon.
But if he hadn't come to the House of Commons yesterday at that time, you would have criticised him.
Well, it's interesting. The timing of that phone call, there's different reports of it. There's one thing coming to the House. Of course, you can always tell the Speaker that you want to do this. There were two statements, and I attended both. You could have swapped them and had the phone call. But I understand another version, and it'd be interesting to find this out eventually. It wasn't that he moved the phone call for. It was actually for the meeting with Conservative MPs afterwards. I'd like clarification as to which one of those it was. But there is always a way of making this work, and it is about the priorities that he picks. At the moment, he is picking himself, and I think it was Andrew Mitchell this morning that really hit the nail on the head. At the moment, Boris Johnson is a corrosive force in the Conservative Party, and unless Conservative members of Parliament now do, in my view, what is their democratic duty, their patriotic duty, and put in their letters of no confidence in the Prime Minister, I think they're going to find that the country will start blaming them for his failures. And I think the Conservative Party is really going to struggle to recover. So I implore Conservative members of Parliament, do the right thing, put in your letter. It's time.
Country, constituency, party. Was Churchill right in that order?
I think so. I would add one, which is community. I think I've always preferred, which is kind of constituency, but also I think community in this modern age is more than just a geography. It is also about a wider sense of the world as well, and that sort of community of humanity. So I would add that word.
OK, Claire Fox.
So I think that maybe we could kind of have a modern update on this, which is kind of, for me, country is the whole democratic mandate. You're there to represent the nation state, and the constituency of voters and the party is fairly self-evident. And the reason I emphasise those things is that I think that we can say that Boris Johnson at particular times has represented a democratic mandate. That's how he got elected, particularly in relation to Brexit. And I think in terms of the voters, he's let them down badly. I hardly need repeat what everybody else has done over the last few days. But I feel anxious about focusing all of this just on Boris Johnson. There's something about it that's quite personalised. So, for example, I just heard the end of the interview that you were doing before this, Iain, and the point was made perfectly reasonably that whilst he is over in Ukraine, he is the Prime Minister of the country. And so consequently, you have to say that he represents the country. And you don't want to be just saying, yes, but he's hopeless, he has parties in his garden, right? You have to go along with that. I also feel that the obvious answer when you ask that question, which is me, about the particular peccadilloes of Boris Johnson and his every single aspects of the way he's handled this has been unsavoury, absolutely unsavoury. But I do think the people who should remove him are the voters, and that ultimately it's a democratic decision, and there is a danger of people's distaste for him. I mean, people in the commentariat, people like me, any of us in this room, that we can get in the way of what the voters want. And I noticed I watched every single news coverage last night, and every single time they did Vox Pops, people would say things like, it's disgusting, he's let us down, they told all the stories, and then people said, will you vote for him? And they said, well, I'll think about it. Would you vote for the opposition? No, not really. I mean, it's a difficult thing, and we shouldn't usurp them with our distaste for his personal failings, of which there are many.
OK. Emily?
I think it's really interesting what you said, but I just don't agree with you, Claire. I mean, I think the point is that he has to have the standing in the country in order to be able to lead us. And I think that his behaviour has been such that people just don't believe him anymore. They just believe that he's a liar and laugh at him. And frankly, internationally, they laugh at him, and therefore they laugh at our country. And I think that the time is therefore for him to go, because I think that he's not just... he's doing no good for our country. I hear what you say about the democratic mandate and that he won a general election with 80-seat majority. But we have a constitution which is slightly. It isn't a presidential system. I mean, when I stand for election, I stand as Emily Thornberry and Labour. People vote for Labour and for Emily Thornberry. So I would always have in country constituency party, and I'd also have conscience. I think that there's something about the way that you are is an important element when you stand. I think that people, of course they vote Labour more than they vote for the individual MP, but I think the individual MP does have an effect.
Constituency,
obviously. but I think the same thing applies, generally in a general election as well. And I think, but look, I don't believe that the Conservative Party are likely to spend a great deal of time listening to my advice, but it is genuinely given. It does the Conservative Party no good at all to continue to hold on to Boris Johnson and what he stands for and what he is doing, and he is dragging down this party. And the way in which he is pushing, or people are being pushed to go onto the media to defend him and saying the most ludicrous and laughable things in order to defend him is one thing. But another thing is happening in order for him to be defended is they're also undermining the civil service, which is also another important part of our constitution. So the whole kind of cats and dogs thing. Was Boris Johnson pushing for cats and dogs to be taken out of Afghanistan in advance of other people? And let's not go into all of that now. But there was an email from someone from the Foreign Office who said, the number 10 has said that this particular charity should have precedence or assistance or whatever it is. Anyway, the defence was people are going out onto the media and saying that civil servant is wrong, they shouldn't have said that, number 10 hadn't said, and essentially saying that the civil servant was a liar. And so attacking the civil service in order to protect the Prime Minister. And those civil servants are not in a position to be able to defend themselves.
Well, the civil servant could have misunderstood. They're not actually saying that the civil servant was a liar, but if the civil servant is saying something that is demonstrably incorrect, you can't blame number 10 for pointing that out, surely.
I think that what number 10 should be doing...
I have no idea whether it's correct or not, by the way.
But I think we as politicians need to have civil servants on our side in order to be able to deliver things. And you can't go around attacking civil servants if you don't have proper cause to do so and they can't defend themselves. And a civil servant, a junior civil servant, would not be saying, everyone knows this, would not be saying number 10 has signed this off if number 10 hadn't signed it off, because they would lose their job immediately. Unlike Prime Minister, who it seems can lie and keep his job, a junior civil servant can't.
When Keir Starmer was talking yesterday, were you both in the chamber?
Yeah.
And at the end of his remarks, when he was essentially repeating what Geoffrey Howe said in 1990, now is the time for others to consider what they do. When you were looking at Tory MPs' faces, what were you both seeing?
I mean, I think at that point it was sort of contemplation. It was interesting watching them, because as he went on and as Boris Johnson started to react badly, to be blunt, some were just seething. You could see that. Some, especially at the back, you look at the backs in the corners.
The awkward squad.
Yeah, you look there, and they were arms crossed, they were peering, and then some of them started to leave at points. I think you ended up having the ones who would defend him sort of left. But I think he just got the mood so badly wrong, not just for his own backbenchers. And it was clear afterwards he got a bit of a pasting in the meeting that he had. Okay. But yeah, it was bad.
I saw them, and they were... And what was so interesting was when Keir was speaking, there was absolute silence on the Tory side, because they were listening to every word. And I personally think that it was the best speech that Keir has given in the House of Commons ever. I thought it was outstanding, and I think it spoke for the country.
Did it not need a bit more anger?
No, I said to him, actually, after he'd sat down, I said, that was brilliant. I would have been much more angry, and I would have been wrong to be more angry. You actually did it.
You do anger quite well, don't you?
I get cross. But But Keir was much more measured, and that was right.
Yeah.
And that was right.
Okay.
Because also the contrast between the way that Keir behaved and the way that Boris Johnson behaved was really remarkable. And I think that there was increasing disgust, I think Layla's right, on the face of Tory MPs watching their own leader behave.
David Buik, you don't have a dog in this race, either a big dog or a little dog. Going back to Richard in Woolwich's question, Winston Churchill said an MP's priorities are country, constituency and party. What are Johnson's priorities? How do you answer that?
Well, it doesn't tick any of those boxes. I don't think in point of fact, the constituency, I think I'll probably have to get a map and tell him it's off the A40 to get to Uxbridge, because I doubt he's been there more than half a dozen times. And the party, I suppose, is way down the list of priorities. It's Johnson 1, country 2, the rest nowhere.
Well, that's very concise. I was kind of hoping you might provide a bit of balance to the rest of the panel. But
I'd just like to add something, is that I don't like personal assassination by the visual media. What has really upset me is the late arrival of the police on the scene.
Mm-hmm.
Plod has really damaged this process. Mm-hmm. We all want it over. It doesn't matter what party you support. We've had it. We're sick to death of it. The days of June 1963, when Jack Profumo left the House of Commons with great dignity, having behaved disgracefully, they've gone. Now we're all into this terminological inexactitude and economy of the truth. Other people call it another blunt word. But the fact remains is the culture has changed. Daniel Finkelstein wrote a fantastic article in the Times about 6 months ago saying people who think that Boris Johnson was going to change with his track record as the London mayor must have been daft. If they voted for him on the fact that they thought he would change, it's just
Can I just defend the voter just for a moment? Because I've spoken to a few of these voters. North Shropshire was a really good opportunity to talk to many of them who had voted for him quite enthusiastically at the last election. And the thing is, and I think those of us who sit on panels like these or are interested in politics always perhaps overestimate the detail to which people who vote will sort of cast it. And when they voted for him, they believed him. I think that's the most wonderful thing. Like, they absolutely believed every word he said. And as he has been shown to them through the position he now has, they've learned more about him and they have found him wanting. And incidentally, that was before. We saw it in Chesham as well. So
but on a personal basis, you're absolutely right. But let's put things also in perspective. Certain things have been delivered, like the economy, which is, I think, the most thing, the furloughing scheme, the fact that we've got very low unemployment, the fact that the economy is recovering quickly. All right, he's putting his hat on that peg every minute of the day, but it is an achievement. But that doesn't, I'm afraid, negate the fact
well, I think that's the point, isn't it? All of his achievements are now being ignored because, understandably, people are becoming so angry about what's happened here.
This is what we're not sure about, and I'm not claiming to be sure of it, but having talked to a lot of people from the Northwest, where I studied as a Brexit Party MEP, and talking to them to try and garner a bit of insight, many people broke a generations habit of moving from Labour to the Conservative Party.
No, they moved from Labour to Boris. That's what they did.
No, but for the Conservative Party, because Boris said he'd deliver Brexit. I don't want to rehearse all that, but that's what they did. Yeah. So it's a bit embarrassing if you did that. You kind of broke this big tradition to go over there. But there's an element of which they then think, but, so I actually think that they saw him flaws and all, but they wanted a particular delivery of a particular thing, and they thought he could do it. So they wouldn't have voted for the Theresa May Conservative Party, and they didn't, or indeed anything else which they would have seen as a fudge. Yeah. So they were voting for not him, but he as the man who would deliver what they wanted. They saw themselves as in control, and they're mortified that then this guy's kind of been shown up. But I don't think they had any illusions that he was a happy chappy, a trustworthy man of discretion. I don't think
that's an interesting point, because you could argue, Emily, that, now that they voted for him because of Brexit, they got what they wanted, and that's now, whatever he does now, it's freed them up to vote for who they like because they got what they wanted.
I think that's probably right. And I think that, can I just, before I answer that, I just don't want to let it pass that when David said that the culture has changed and that it is now acceptable for...
It's changed.
It's changed.
I don't think it's not acceptable.
It's not acceptable. And I don't think that having a Prime Minister who lies to Parliament and gets away with it means that the culture has changed. I think
Do you think he has got away with it?
Well, so far
Let's
he has.
see.
So far he has, but it's certainly he should have I think he should have gone at least a month ago. But the point is that it's not acceptable, and it continues to not be acceptable, and we mustn't allow it to become acceptable. We mustn't allow this man to change our political culture. We must not allow it to become the norm that people lie. I know people think politicians lie, but actually, surprisingly, we don't quite a lot. I mean, occasionally,
caught out pretty quickly.
Yeah, exactly.
By the likes of Iain.
Exactly. And so I think that's. But I just wanted to kind of say that because I think that's important. And as for the voted for Boris because of Brexit, and Brexit's been delivered. It reminds me a little bit of the Khaki election, which took place about 100 years ago, where the Tories stood on the basis of we're going to fight the Boer War, and they did nothing else but that. And then they got a massive, great majority on the back of that, and the Boer War didn't go well. And then the polls swung back again, and the Liberals came in with a massive majority afterwards. If you go for an election on a single issue, I think that
who would think
polls can be very destabilised.
Would come up on this discussion.
I feel I've learned something.
I feel I've learned something.
I still think. I think trying to imagine, just very quickly, trying to imagine that Brexit is over and everyone can move on is not quite right. Because actually, the one thing that everybody I speak to say is there's too much enthusiasm to get rid of him over Brexit, and if you want contempt for the public. Okay. Guess what? It's the opposition
I'm getting
parties,
people shouting in my ear to say, go to a break, because I am very, very late. It's 21 minutes past 8. Sorry.
LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
8:24. Emily Thornberry, Claire Fox, David Buik and Layla Moran here answering your questions. You've all got to be quite brief on this one, otherwise I'm going to be really late going to the news at 8:30, so behave yourselves. Clive is in Miami. Hello, Clive. At least I think he's in Miami. Are you there, Clive? Nope, he's not. Let's go to Colin in Brighouse instead. Hello, Colin.
Hello there, good evening.
Hi.
Yeah, I'd like to know how it is that Boris Johnson can find £88 million to help the Ukrainians with their fuel energy costs for Russia, well, against Russia, and yet our pensioners here are going to get nothing. It cancelled the triple lock and is giving all this money away to other groups of people, but the pensioners have been really left behind. And most pensioners, like myself, who've worked for 52 years, not in an highly paid job, who has to rely on their state pension to pay everything, and not entitled to working tax credits or all these other bits and bats that's going. I'd like to know where he keeps getting this money from when we owe about, £40 billion to... well, we owe £40 billion because we're broke. And
it's actually 2.3 trillion, I think, by now.
Well,
OK, Colin, we get the question. Claire Fox.
So it's a great question, because at the heart of it is what I think actually Boris Johnson should be being held to account for much more, which is the energy crisis. And I don't just mean a kind of...
It's a worldwide energy crisis, isn't it?
Yes, but I also think that we've got our... At some point, national sovereignty has to mean something, because you have to be held responsible for what you do here, right?
Yeah.
And I do think that there's a real problem, which is that we haven't remotely kept enough nuclear power stations open or started any new ones. I think the government's made a huge mistake in terms of moratorium on fracking and shale gas. I think the obsession with net zero has caused a huge problems down the line, and I think that presenting the net zero targets as though they're an act of God or an international treaty that there is no alternative about, and pump heat boilers and electric cars and all these. Yes, I know. I nearly went there. But all of that. What I'm trying to say is that in the meantime, as our callers just illustrated, there's an absolute terror of what this is going to cost. And so one of the dangers of the Ukraine trip and the international situation, and I'm not trying to in any way underestimate what's happening on the borders between Russia and Ukraine, is that it's always tempting when you've got a domestic problem at home to want to kind of go big on the world stage. I mean, we saw David Cameron do it with Libya. I mean, Blair... obviously with Iraq and so on and so forth. I'm slightly worried about a kind of sabre-rattling, stirring things up, going in and saving everything so you can say, look, I'm the international statesperson, and also, by the way, we'll solve your energy problems. When actually, here, right now, what we should be talking about is what is the government going to do to resolve the problems it's got us into in terms of energy, and if it's an international crisis, how's it going to get out of it for the UK citizens at the moment?
Emily will tell us how she's going to get out of it.
I think that what they should do is they should cut VAT on energy prices, because the government's made a lot of money out of VAT because the energy prices have gone up so much. So they've got the money in the bank. They can, from that,
and that would help pensioners like Colin.
So that would help pensioners like Colin. That would actually help everybody. And we know that energy prices are about to double. But we would also have a windfall tax on the energy companies who have made a great deal of money out of the fact that the prices have gone up recently. And from that windfall tax, we would then target that particularly on the poorest, on the squeezed middle.
Just on that, though, have they made a lot of money? Because they would surely say the only reason that the bills are going up is because it costs us a lot more to buy electricity or gas. So that doesn't necessarily mean they're making more money, does it?
No, because
David will tell us if they are in a minute.
It's an international energy price. That's the point, So they've been making money because the price internationally has gone up, and it's for that reason that we say that. And they've talked about, haven't they? They've talked about, I think the head of BP said that the energy prices were like a cash point for them, and we were debating this in Parliament today. So no, we think that it's about time they were held to account on this. We need to have a windfall tax, and we need to be able to help those who are going to be really struggling. And frankly, when there's a choice between pensioners struggling with energy costs and the energy companies, we know which side we're on.
And we're talking about billions in terms of helping people with energy, their energy bills here, aren't we? I mean, £88 million for Ukraine. Does that bother you at all?
I think that the point is this, is that it's really important that the international community remains completely united in its opposition to what Russia is trying to do in Ukraine and bullying them. And we as the opposition stand with the government on this. There's very little difference between us. We think that some of the sanctions could be more ambitious and imaginative, but otherwise we support them. And Ukrainians need to know that we will give them support.
David?
First and foremost, I think it's a fallacy to think that the energy companies have made a lot of money over the last few years. Emily, just to remind you that last year BP lost $18 billion. They had to write it off because of this. I thought...
What about the buyback on the shares?
Well, that's small beer by comparison with what was actually lost. If you look at the share price of BP, which has actually recovered well in the course of the last year, but it's been a very poor investment during the course of the last 5 years.
They haven't had 2 or 3 buybacks, I mean, like of billions.
Well, let's not get into BP buybacks, but if we can...
let's just try and move the question on a bit. Bernard Looney, in my opinion, and Ben van Beurden of Shell are trying to make that transfer, which I think endorses really what Claire's been saying, from old energy, in other words, oil and gas, to green energy. It's too fast. It's going to take an awful lot of time. And the one product that we haven't used properly, and we are not using properly, is gas. Gas is clean and it's cheap, relatively speaking. I know we're into a spike now at the moment. And both of these huge major companies have gone hell for leather to go green. And it's far, far too quick.
Okay. Layla.
So my answer to Colin is that I don't think it's not either or. Okay, first of all, we have to take care of pensioners. We Liberal Democrats don't think it's right to remove the triple lock, for example, unless you've got protections, particularly for the poorest pensioners. We absolutely think that the Chancellor shouldn't have written off, £4 billion in fraud. Yeah. Eye-watering sums of money in terms of government incompetence, spending of taxpayer pound that should be going to protecting the poorest. That can happen. But at the same time, it is right that we support Ukraine. It's worth noting that 88 million is not just for their energy resilience, it's also about transparency. I think it sticks in the throat slightly, though, because whilst the sanctions are important, we still haven't introduced really important legislation in this country to make sure that that dirty Russian money, stuff that is coming from Putin to his oligarchs being spent in London, is transparent. So I've got an amendment down to the finance bill tomorrow that scopes out what a register of beneficial ownership would look like, so that those multi-million pound properties that we know are being bought by shell companies that are owned by these Russian oligarchs
are the
can be
Labour Party
exposed.
supporting it?
My understanding, there are similar amendments that have gone down from Labour, the SNP. I've got Conservatives, including Iain Duncan-Smith, who have signed my amendment. There is broad cross-party support for this. And I will point out that this is just legislation that the government itself said 6 years ago that it would introduce. All I'm trying to do is to deliver a Conservative Party promise.
Would you support this?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, George Osborne talked about it, as you say, 6 or 7 years ago, and it just seemed to find its way onto the back burner. It is wrong, because this is unallocated money. It's not properly catered for. As we all know, Putin's probably the richest man in the world, and he siphons money into Spain.
I mean, this is a whole different subject, but it is really odd that if I sell a car and want to pay £3,000 in notes into my bank, I have to prove all sorts of things as to where that's come from. It's outrageous, isn't it? Anyway, mustn't get sidetracked onto that. Richard, our first caller, has tweeted, "Please thank the cross-question panel, and I think they took my question about Boris Johnson's priorities to a very reflective and thoughtful level."
Oh,
well, there you
wow.
go. Praise indeed. More of that, please. It's 8:33. News headlines with Serena Farrow.
Boris Johnson insists the UK and its allies are ready to put sanctions in place the moment the first Russian tow cap crosses further into Ukrainian territory. The Prime Minister's met the country's president in Kiev. Manchester United footballer Mason Greenwood has been further arrested on suspicion of sexual assault and threats to kill. Police have been given more time to question him following his initial arrest on Sunday. And evidence of racism, sexual harassment, misogyny and bullying has been uncovered within the ranks of the Met Police. Scotland Yard has apologised after being criticised for disgraceful behaviour by a number of officers. LBC weather: patchy rain for Wales, Northern Ireland and much of England tonight. A low of 4 degrees.
This is LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC.
8:37. If you've just tuned in, Emily Thornberry, Claire Fox, David Buik and Layla Moran with me in the studio answering your questions. Martin is in Abingdon. Hello, Martin.
Hello, Ian, and good evening, panel. I was very angry when I heard that they dropped the fourth. They decided not to collect in taxes, or reclaim for the £4 billion or nearly £5 billion. The reason why I was angry was my daughter Emma died, and shortly after she died, I received letters from the MRC, not just one letter, 31 letters, claiming that she owed £4,800 and they wanted it. I looked at her paperwork and I thought, she doesn't owe this money. And I couldn't get through to them, so in the end, I contacted my MP, which is Layla, and she fought on our behalf. And not only did Emma not owe any money, they owed her £4,800. And so they were chasing dead people.
Yeah.
It's all right for them to chase dead people, but not these other people.
Well, let's go to Layla then. So that was one case that worked.
It was, and hi, Martin. I remember this case and my office discussing it, and when that win came through, that was amazing. And there are times actually as an MP where it's these wins that really carry you, because this is the bread and butter of what we do, and it's an honour to be able to help. I think what is always difficult though is like, what if you hadn't have come to your MP? What if your MP somewhere else wasn't as responsive? It shouldn't take an MP going to HMRC to argue on your behalf.
No, but you are effectively the person of last resort, aren't you? That is kind of what you're there for, because no public body wants to get a letter from Layla Moran or Emily Thornberry.
Absolutely, and I very much
sort this out.
Exactly, and I very much hope when they do, they know that she's just not going to stop. So keep looking at it. But I think to the thrust of the question, though, I think the COVID fraud, it's really difficult for a lot of people to take. We had a hearing of the all-party group on coronavirus this morning, where we looked at people who had gained and lost financially in coronavirus. And we were talking to people who had lost their businesses. One chap said he'd worked out that he had personally paid in something like £1.6 million to the Exchequer over the course of his working life. And he'd lost his business. He didn't qualify for any of the different schemes that had been set up. He'd started a group called Forgotten Limited, and he got £2,000 back. And he felt so angry. He palpably was angry because this COVID fraud that they're not even bothering to collect. He was told the reason why they couldn't help people like him was because he was a fraud risk. And it just really, really shocked him. So I hope, and the resignation of Lord Agnew, I think, was really a watershed moment last week. If people haven't watched him do it, it is the Lord's at its highest drama, which is rare. And I would encourage you to listen to his speech and also read the Sunday Times interview that he gave. They just didn't care. He said, I was raising issues of fraud in HMRC, in the Treasury, and no one there cared. And it's just not good enough.
But Emily said before, they shouldn't be attacking civil servants, but this was a failure on the part of civil servants to go after people, wasn't it? And he was the minister responsible. He didn't feel that he could do anything. I mean, I don't know whether he tried to get the Chancellor to intervene or not, indeed. But clearly David, you're gagging to get in.
I am gagging to get in. Only to really endorse what you said, Ian, and also what Layla said to a certain degree, is that I've got a very good friend who's quite a senior partner in a large firm of accountants. No answer of any letters from HMRC, can't get an answer. Why? They're not at work. They're at home. And that has to stop. And I'm not trying to knock the civil service, because there are some brilliant brains and brilliant minds here. But the one thing that if government is going to work properly, we need people to be able to exchange views and ideas, and for them to sit at home on their computer waiting to get another pair of spectacles, because that's all they do all day, in terms of execute their business, is simply not enough. And I think that terrible case that Layla's handled so well, and I'm so sad about to hear the whole story, is just indicative of what happens when you don't have everybody firing off six cylinders.
Claire?
I absolutely understand David's fury on... Martin's fury on this. And just listening to what David said, I think it's a combination of two things. There is something wrong with the priorities, and I agree with Layla about Lord Agnew's speech. Absolutely extraordinary.
Were you there?
No, I wasn't there. The worst thing was I was watching it from working at home. However, and I did tweet at the time, I can't believe the one day I don't go in. I go in every day diligently, and I didn't go in, and there was this drama. But I listened to it very carefully, because what he described was that he knew how to recover the money. He knew what to do. He had it all worked out. And he couldn't get anyone to take any notice. And I do think that there is something about the working at home culture. I think there has to be a point at which you can criticise civil servants without trying to hide behind, I hate that kind of outsourcing blame to civil servants. Yep. You have to be able to say when they're doing something badly. But there's something about the set of priorities here. But the big overall picture we have to recognise is the collateral damage of lockdown policies, regardless of what side you were on, have been enormous, right? They have been enormous. They have destroyed the livelihoods of huge numbers of people. We're referring to the forgotten limited people who never got any help, but actually the people who did get help, people who were on furlough. I mean, hospitality, as we know, has been destroyed. And so what I cannot bear is this indifference to this fraud in the midst of it all, because we've actually got to now not attaching blame, rebuild economic growth. We've got to really kickstart the economy. We've all got to be doing that. That's what I want to be doing, not talking about Partygate. I want to do that, right? And when you've got a kind of sneering indifference to a waste of money on the one hand, and then a petty-minded going after a gentleman whose daughter died for an amount of money which she didn't even owe anyway. But it's almost like even if she did owe it, you just think, oh, for God's sake, everybody. There's something wrong with... There's a technocratic mindset that's sitting at home that's somehow missing, and that's when people talk about a kind of moral chasm at the heart of government. This is it for me.
I'm so sorry that happened to you, Martin. It must have been just dreadful. Losing your daughter must have been hard enough. But to then have this, you being chased in this way, I'm so sorry that this happened.
Because the problem is, a lot of people would have given up at that point, wouldn't they? They'd have probably just said, "Well, we're never going to get this right, so we'll have to pay it."
I just don't know. I mean, I'm glad that you had, that you were that what you were entitled to, you were given. I mean, I think that quite often as an MP, my job is just getting people heard. And once they're heard, then they get what they're entitled to. I never get anybody anything they're not entitled to, but I do get them heard. And that's, a good MP can make all the difference in that. And I think
she's calling you a good MP, Layla.
Thank you, Emily.
You can put that on your election literature.
Just don't wind me up. But I do think also as has already been said, this indifference to £4.3 billion worth of fraud, a kind of, oh, well, it's all too hard to sort out, is just disgraceful. And we also have £8.7 billion, I hear today, in PPE contracts in 2021, PPE that didn't work. And the only people who seem to have made any money out of all of this are the sort of VIP friends of this government who are getting contracts on PPE. But, we seem to be paying, billions and billions, and the indifference to that. And then there's sort of on the one hand, and then on the other hand being, oh, but we've got to raise national insurance because we haven't got enough money coming in. They just don't have their priorities right. And it is because they can't see the wood for the trees, because they are basically fighting for their lives, fighting for their existence, fighting for the Prime Minister, and they don't get a chance to sit back and think about what is important and what are the priorities.
Martin, do I remember rightly that you phoned into the programme some months ago and I advised you to bring Layla Moran? Because I think that's right, isn't it?
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Iain.
So it's basically all down to me, that's what I'm saying.
I listen to your programme every night, Iain.
Well, you're a great man.
Programme every night, and I just want to take the opportunity to thank Layla from the bottom of my heart.
Oh, bless you.
Let's all have a group hug.
It made such a big difference. Sorry, I'm getting a bit emotional.
Oh, Martin.
No, don't apologise, Martin.
It was my honour, and I'm so sorry we even had to get involved.
Do you know, over the years on this programme, I have advised quite a lot of people to contact their MPs, and it's really nice to hear from somebody where that really has worked. Because, I mean, look, MPs aren't miracle workers. They can't magic answers all the time. But as I said, any public authority that gets a letter from the House of Commons, they do take it seriously, and it can actually really help. Martin, thank you very much. It's 8:47.
This is LBC. Leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale. Tweet at LBC.
It's 10 to 9. We have Emily Thornberry, Claire Fox, David Buik and Layla Moran with us. Let's go to Luke in Bromley. Hello, Luke.
Hi, good evening. My question is, given the fact that nurses and NHS staff are allowed to return or not be fired, how soon should care staff be reinstated their jobs, and should compensation be given obviously the sheer stress and obviously lack of earnings and so forth that's occurred?
Now, Sajid Javid announced a consultation yesterday, but I imagine it has to be a pretty short consultation, given the deadline, I think, is the day after tomorrow to have your first vaccine.
No, the deadline's
they've
raised the deadline, so people don't have to be vaccinated by the time that the government originally said. They're now going to do a consultation. We don't know how long that's going to take.
OK, well, Emily, you answer the question.
No, I mean, that's it. So that's what the government's decided to do. They've decided to kind of look at all of this again. I mean, obviously things have changed since the policy was first announced. Omicron was not as bad as everyone feared it would be. More of the NHS staff actually got vaccinated than was expected, and so I think that it's been right for the government to start looking at this matter again. I mean, I think something that people don't talk about, and I think is important to put into the mix, is that NHS staff are expected to get vaccines, other vaccines, and can't work without them. So, I would simply say that, I think that there's an argument for the COVID jab to be part of the number of vaccines that you have to take if you're a frontline staff.
But what about, as Luke says, the care workers who've already lost their jobs because of this?
Yeah. I don't think that that should have been done in the way that it was. I didn't understand why care workers were being forced to have a vaccine when NHS staff weren't. That was inconsistent in my view, and it shouldn't have been done in that way. And also, they did it too fast. In the end,
They did it too fast because you normally criticise them for doing too little.
No, but they just let's do this. Everybody's let's be shown to have some sort of be moving on this. Let's be shown to be men of action. Let's force NHS care workers to have a vaccine now. No, really, if you actually wanted to maximise the number of people getting a vaccine, then what you didn't do was to give care workers the choice. Either get vaccinated or lose your job. You needed to work much longer on persuading them, because they do really care for the people that they're looking after, and to be persuaded that it was in their interest and in the interest of the people that they love to get vaccinated.
Layla.
The Liberal Democrats were against mandatory vaccination from the start, not because we don't think people should get vaccinated. We have always encouraged people to get that jab, but because, and I think this is now being borne out, those kinds of divisive policies that take autonomy away from the individual for their own body seemed to harden people who are hesitant to then say, well, I don't want the state doing that to me. At a time when people are, this is a pandemic, this is new, you need to bring people along with you. And the government didn't do that. So the answer to Luke's question, in my view, is yes. If they can be brought back, they should. There's 40,000 care workers that are gone. There were consequences for that over Christmas. There were visits that could not happen because there just simply wasn't the staff. And I think now what the government needs to do is abandon mandatory vaccination in this way, abandon the COVID passport idea, and encourage people in a positive way, in a way that isn't this divisive, to get the jab. That is shown in so many different places to be the way that you get those people to engage with vaccination. I'm sorry to say, I think that this is the government now realising what we did all along, which is that it was going to make an already bad problem worse.
Okay.
But Layla, hepatitis...
We're not going to get onto a second question if you do that, Emily. Claire?
I actually think... Emily, on this one, the Labour Party made a real mistake. I think to be seen to be associated with sacking people because of their medical status is a disastrous thing to have done for the Labour Party. And I watched it in the House of Lords, and it was an uncomfortable moment for a start off, and especially frontline workers who everyone clapped and all the usual things. And it is very important that people are able to make a decision about their medical status. And saying NHS workers have to get vaccines, first of all, only very particular, and they know when they're applying for the job. Yes, no, I know, but the point is, these are people who are working there, who are getting sacked, right? Very different. And the care workers themselves, the lowest poorly paid people treated as though they were criminals. And worse in terms of divisiveness was this idea that we look on each other as vaccinated or unvaccinated in society. So I think it's atrocious. But one thing I would say is that the NHS 100k and the Together campaigns, grassroots campaigns, actually really deserve some credit, because I don't think the government would have done it just with a bit of Lib Dem opposition and me going on in the House of Lords. There was a genuine grassroots opposition, and then very sensibly people like the Royal College of Nursing said, actually this is a disaster, by the way. But and then to call them anti-vaxxers, and lots of healthcare workers, by the way, who were 3 jabbed, as I am and all the rest of it, did it on the basis of civil liberties and freedom. We still live in a free society, and we should not abandon that because we had one virus, however serious it is.
Very quickly, I profoundly disagree with all of you. It's the only success, or it's one of the few successes the government's had, is vaccination.
Oh, we agree with that.
Yeah, no, may I finish very quickly? And the other thing is just to say to Emily, the reason I think that it was important for the care workers to get jab, age. They were the vulnerable people. And that, I think, mustn't be underestimated.
Stop transmission.
Right, 45 to 60 seconds from each of you on this next one. Luke, thank you very much for that, by the way. Nikki in Bromley has texted, Boris Johnson's Jimmy Savile comments are being criticised by one of his victims today on LBC. Should he face greater consequences? David?
I think it was just very poor taste, to be honest with you. I just think it was completely unnecessary. That's what I call, when you're in a heavyweight bout, somebody hits you below the plimsoll line. It was unnecessary. If you want to criticise Keir Starmer for whatever it is, that's fine. But just that, I think, was just completely unnecessary. I haven't really got anything else more to add to it.
No bans, no sanctions, but the court of public opinion should see it for the tacky attack that it was. And actually, he would have been much better to have made a big fuss today about the inquiry, which had been much neglected, into the grooming gangs. And that I believe you might even be going to discuss the grooming gangs inquiry
in about 4 minutes' time.
But if you to go on about Jimmy Savile from the past, utterly cheap, stupid comment. But no sanctions, just we hold him in contempt for it.
And Emily Thornberry, apparently all the Labour front bench is on drugs.
So I hear. I've never seen any.
I should explain that Boris Johnson also said that, but rather than people thinking that it's me accusing
it was. I've never seen any evidence of that, but it was another dead cat, wasn't it? I mean, this is from a Donald Trump playbook. This is the tell a lie, tell it loud enough, shout it, make it something ridiculous, and everyone goes, "Oh my goodness, there's a dead cat on the table," and it's very difficult to actually then turn back to the truth. And the truth is that we have a Prime Minister who's a liar and he should not be in office anymore.
Should Keir Starmer have stood up and raised a point of order at that point?
No, I don't think so. I think the best thing to do is just turn away.
Layla?
What blows my mind is that this was planned.
Yeah, exactly.
That apparently he had sort of been bandying this around with the team that prepares him for these kinds of things and had been advised not to do it. And then despite their advice, their good advice, decided to spread this sort of conspiracy theory. And I think it just shows the man for what he is. The greatest consequence is that we vote him out at the next election. And for now, I actually agree with Emily. At the time, it was just shocking and we should just kind of ignore it.
Diane in Horsham has texted, Poet Hannah Lowe has won the Costa Book of the Year with a collection of modern sonnets inspired by the highs and lows of teaching A-level English. Who was your favourite teacher at school? Claire?
I taught English, but I wasn't my own favourite teacher. But I was inspired. I taught English in further education for many years, and the person who inspired me was Mr. John Rogers, who basically said, "You're from Buckley, not a very inspirational place, but if you read literature, you can go anywhere." And he made me believe in a school that had gone from secondary modern to comprehensive that I could conquer the world. By the way, I think he so profoundly disagrees with everything I stand for now. He regrets it deeply because he's kind of Plaid Cymru activist.
Layla?
There are a number of them. The one that springs to mind is a man called Mr. England, who was my chemistry teacher. I ended up doing chemistry and maths and physics at A-level. I did physics for my undergrad and just became a science teacher. I then caught up...
I got ungraded physics at O-level.
Did you? Because you didn't have me as a teacher.
And I had private lessons
I'd have made you love it. I'd have made you love it.
Wouldn't.
But actually, I then found out when I was elected that he stood for the Lib Dems in Brighton. And I had no idea at all that he... as far as I was concerned, he slept in the school, as you do with teachers. Yeah. They don't leave the building. But he was just absolutely inspiring when it came to chemistry teaching.
David?
A chap called Ronnie Watkins. Ronnie Watkins with A.L. Rouse was probably the definitive authority on William Shakespeare. And he was not only a brilliant teacher of English, but he also produced all the plays, which we had a wooden O at school, which made him, for me, an absolute hero.
Emily?
Miss Wilson, my history teacher, Mr. Blair, my music teacher, and not my...
Tony Blair taught you music?
No, Mr. Blair was a musician, and he taught us music, and not my careers teacher, because I was at a secondary modern, and my careers teacher at my secondary modern, when I asked him what I should do with myself, he said, "You could always go visit people in prison."
There's no answer to that.
Just on the Shakespeare bit, though, I did think funny yesterday that apparently, allegedly, in the meeting last night, Boris Johnson said he saw himself as Othello. Yes. And obviously, Dominic Cummings as Iago. But obviously, as a number of people have pointed out, Othello did actually kill his wife. It wasn't the best. You know what I mean? It's like one of those things where you just think, you absolute prat.
I think we probably ought to finish there. I did think yesterday's cross question was unique, but I think this one has been also. The Madam Editor on Twitter says, the best, absolutely the best cross question tonight with Iain Dale. I have a lot of time for Emily Thornberry. Now also Layla Moran. Can we just govern by coalition?
Excuse me, what about us?
Well, unfortunately,
we got blown away, Claire.
The two of you don't get a mention. Well, thank you so much. It's been a really brilliant hour. Emily Thornberry, Layla Moran, Claire Fox and David Buik. We'll be back with another cross question tomorrow at 8. And as Claire so presciently predicted, we are going to be talking about this report from the I never get this right, the Historic Inquiry into Child Sexual Abuse. We're going to be talking about a report that was released today about the fact that the police and local authorities still don't seem to be able to identify the grooming gangs, particularly in the north of England and the Midlands. We'll be asking why that would be and getting your reaction in just a moment. 0345 6060 973. It's 2 minutes past 9.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 9 o'clock, the Prime Minister says Ukraine is facing the greatest demonstration of hostility from Russia the world's ever seen in a lifetime. Boris Johnson's been in Kiev to discuss with the President the build-up of troops from Moscow on its border.